On today's episode, we get into groups and components. So at the end of this video, you're going to be able to know how to make a group, how to edit a group, how to ungroup a group, and we're going to distinguish between what a group and a component is, when you would want to use it, and what the major differences between the two are. And then obviously, lastly, we're going to get into the component library. So let's go ahead and get started. So here on the screen you can obviously see two very distinct boxes that I was able to make, and as I select this you can see that I can select each individual surface, line edges, things along those lines. So to your eye, as you see this on the screen, you say, yeah, this is one object. But SketchUp doesn't see it that way. SketchUp sees it as these individual parts that make up kind of a whole in the plane and the orientation that it is. So if I were to come in here and select this, and I were to move it around, I could move it around like obviously like so. And this is a tool that we'll get into next episode more. So I'm not going to go into too in depth with this. Like so. Okay. However, if I come in and I just select maybe like a surface or an edge, you can see that it kind of gets a little hairy here in regards to what you might want it to do and in what SketchUp wants it to do. So again, SketchUp sees this as an individual piece, not necessarily everything put together. Alright, and another thing is when we actually go to move things, and let's say we want this piece to be up against this other piece here, again, in your mind you might say that this is a different piece than this, but as soon as that comes up and kind of makes contact with other items in your SketchUp, you can see here now that without actually selecting it, it kind of sticks to one another. Alright, so we don't want to obviously have that, because that can make messes of our models. So how do we prevent that from happening? How do we tell SketchUp, hey, I don't see this, or I don't want these individual line segments and surfaces to be individual, I want them to be a group or a single object. So in this case, again, I would come in here, select it, and in order to turn it into a group, all you have to do is right click on it and then make group. And at that point in time, SketchUp kind of takes all the pieces that have been selected and puts them kind of in a bounding box. So that's kind of why you see these lines all of a sudden appear around this, because now SketchUp sees that this is one object. So if I come in here and move this now, you can see that just like previously before, I come in here and I'm touching this, but the good news is that's not going to be combined together now with these other pieces. Okay, so that is the main reason why you want to group things together. Unfortunately, there is a couple of things here that can be frustrating, or at least bad news. Okay, so if I, let's say, want to edit my group, and I want to push and pull, I can now not able to do that. Okay, so that's a problem. So how do I go in and manipulate or edit this after the fact, after I turned it into a group? Well, all I'd have to end up doing is double clicking on my object, and what ends up happening is that kind of opens up my object for editing, and it does that because, or how that does that or distinguishes that, communicates that to you, is to create a dotted box around your object that you've opened up for editing. Now I can come in with my push-pull tool and I can obviously fix anything in my component, or excuse me, in my group. Okay, and anything outside that, such as this object here, is going to kind of get grayed out and made not as distinct as the object that is being edited. So how do I get out of the editing part here? Well, pretty simple. I would just end up clicking outside of the dashed box, and now my other object has come back into its normal viewing colorization, if you will, and we can obviously go back and forth as much as we need to. But it's a simple double click to open that up. Okay, let's pretend for a second that I didn't want this to be grouped up anymore. It served its purpose, it's where it needs to be at, but for whatever reason I don't want it to be grouped up. Well, if I right click again on the selected object, it's going to give me an option to explode. And this is not like an explosion you would find in real life, but all you're doing is telling SketchUp, hey, I want this group to no longer be one entity, I want it to be all individual pieces like previously. So I hit explode, and now it basically ungroups that for me to where now I can treat it as individual parts again. Okay, so that's what a group is. That's how to create a group, how to edit a group, and how to ungroup it. Now, on a side note here, we're going to transition into turning things into a component, and it's really the same stuff. We would select what we would want to make as a component, right click, but instead of saying make it a group, we can make it a component. And when I do that, there is one difference here already that you can see, is a little box comes up, or a little menu that wants some information about what the component is. And for right now, we're just going to get into naming the component, because as you're going to see later, I'm going to actually be able to look at that and say, oh, hey, I have a component library. I want to be able to pull out a particular component that I previously made. So we want to give it a logical name. In this case, I'll just name it Simple Box. Okay, that's all I need to do. I hit OK, and then SketchUp essentially stores this as kind of a template for my component. Okay, but it functions and acts just like a group. Has the bounding box. Double click to edit it, so I can do stuff on it, and then I can unclick it if I select it, and I can hit explode. Again, it just takes that component and pulls it apart just like a group. So then what exactly is the difference between a component and a group, and why would you want to make one over the other? Okay, so here's going to end up being your main difference in a component and a group. This piece here, same as before, I grouped it together and I turned this into a component. This over here I grouped together and I made it a group. Then I made copies of each of these and made them out. We call that an array. Again, we'll talk more about that in next episode. So as you can see here, I can double click and edit this group, and as I'm editing it, it acts as an individual entity, meaning that it shares no parts with the other groups in the copy. So I can individually edit each piece, which may or may not be a good thing, right? If I have, let's say, 4 legs on a table, and I make copies of that, but that was only grouped together, I would have to individually come in here and edit each one of these and hope that I'm making them all the same. Okay, so it can be kind of a lot of work and effort that way. However, if I made it a component and then I made copies of it, I'm going to come in here and edit this. You're going to see very quickly how I edit one component and all of the components, or all the copies of that component, are then edited at the same time. So again, you would want to use this if you are planning on making copies of your component for faster editing in the future. So that's the major distinguish between a group and a component, and why you would want to choose a component over a group. If you are in doubt of whether you should make it a group or a component, I would always err on the side of making it a component, because you can always come in later and explode it and make that a group later if you need to. Now if I come in here and edit this one, because that is no longer a part of the component, it's not going to be edited. Alright, last thing that we're going to show you guys here real quick is the component library. So if we come over here on our right menu, this 3-tiered box, if you hover over it, it'll say components. I can click on that, And this is going to list out under the home icon all the different components that you've made in your model so far. So again, let's pretend I was making a table and I made it a leg a component. I could come in here and find that leg, and then I could click on it, and now I can have that component attached to my mouse cursor that I could move out. So again, a really quick, easy way of making that copy. And then again, if I come in here and edit this one, it's attached to those copies and it will be edited as well. So hopefully you guys learned a lot in this. Again, get out there, play around with that. Groups and components are a very important factor when making your model, especially when we're starting getting into this more detailed stuff. And you're going to see it's going to be important to bypass that sticky geometry, as we like to call it. So get in the habit of making that stuff, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.